I know what it feels like to survive a war. I know what it feels like to carry men twice your size through mud and smoke and gunfire. To hold a friend while he bleeds out and whisper things you know he can't hear anymore, just because you need somewhere to put the words. I know what it feels like to be so tired. Your hands shake, but your mind won't stop running calculations. Distance, wind, threat level, exit routes, even when you're supposed to be sleeping. I know what it feels like to do all of that, to survive all of that. But I want to tell you something I never said out loud until now. None of it, not 1 second of it, came close to the feeling of standing in Terminal 4 at LAX, duffel bag over my shoulder, and watching the woman I loved hand me back my ring like it was a piece of trash she found in her purse. That's where this story starts. Right there, under the fluorescent lights, surrounded by strangers who had no idea what they were watching. Right there, in the middle of people holding balloons and cardboard signs and crying into each other's necks. That's where Brianna Harrington looked me in the eye and decided I wasn't worth it. And I need you to understand something before I go any further. She wasn't wrong about everything. She just didn't know what she was looking at. Before I tell you what happened that day, I need to take you back, because none of this makes sense without the beginning, and the beginning started long before Brianna, long before the military, long before any of it. The beginning started on a block in Compton, California, where the sidewalks were cracked and the summers were so hot, the air smelled like asphalt and somebody's barbecue from 3 houses down. Always, every single day, like the neighborhood ran on that smell alone. I grew up in a small house on Willowbrook Avenue, 2 bedrooms, me and my grandmother. Everybody called her Big Mama, had been calling her that since before I was born, and by the time I came around, the name had calcified into something official, something sacred. She was a small woman, maybe 5'2" on a good day, but she took up space the way mountains do, quietly, completely, in a way that made you feel like nothing bad could get past her. My mother was gone by the time I was 4. Not dead, just gone. There's a difference, and for a long time I wasn't sure which one was harder to carry. My father, I never knew. So it was just me and Big Mama in that little house, and she raised me on 3 things: hard work, good sense, and the understanding that the world would not give me anything I didn't earn twice over. She was right about all 3. I wasn't a bad kid. I wasn't a great student, but I wasn't bad. I was the kind of kid who paid attention to everything. The way people moved, the way they talked when they thought nobody was listening, the gap between what people said and what they meant. I noticed things. That's probably why I ended up doing what I did. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Down the street from us, in a house with a chain-link fence and a garden that Big Mama used to call the prettiest thing on this block, lived the Washington family. Mr. Darnell Washington worked at the bus depot. His wife, Ms. Carroll, worked at a school cafeteria, and they had a daughter, Aaliyah. She was a year younger than me. Skinny kid with big eyes and a gap in her front teeth that she grew out of by 8th grade, but that I can still see if I close my eyes long enough. We used to sit on the front steps of her house on summer evenings while the street lights buzzed on one by one, eating popsicles and talking about the kind of things kids talk about when they don't yet know how big the world is and how hard it's going to push back. We talked about everything: college, money, getting out, what getting out even meant when it was all you'd ever wanted, but you couldn't fully picture the other side of it. She wanted to be a nurse. She said it so clearly, so completely without doubt, that I believed her immediately. And I was the kind of kid who didn't believe much easily. There was a night, the summer before I started high school, when we were sitting out on those steps later than usual. The block was quiet, a rare thing. And Aliyah said, out of nowhere, in the way that teenagers say things that are only half jokes, "If we're both still single when we're 30, we should just figure it out together." She laughed when she said it, bumped my shoulder with hers. I laughed too, but I remembered it, stored it somewhere I didn't examine too closely. The way you put something fragile in a box and set it on a high shelf and tell yourself you'll deal with it later. I joined the army at 18, not because I had no options, but because I had thought through my options more carefully than most people twice my age, and decided this was the fastest road to the life I was building toward. Big Mama cried. First time I ever saw her cry. She grabbed my face in both hands and said, "You come back to me, Marcus James. You hear me? You come all the way back." I promised her I would. I kept that promise. I kept it 5 times, across 5 different deployments, across 2 different decades, across more situations I can't describe in public and wouldn't describe even if I could. What I can tell you is that I was good at it. Better than good. The kind of good that gets noticed by people with stars on their shoulders. The kind of good that gets you moved into units that don't have names on paper, into operations that don't exist in any official record, into a role where your value is directly proportional to how invisible you can make yourself. They called me the Ghost, not because I was quiet, though I was. Not because I was fast, though I was that too. They called me the Ghost because I had a way of moving through a situation and leaving behind exactly the outcome I intended, and nothing else. No trace, no noise, just results. By the time I was 30, I was a Special Forces commander with a record that my own government had classified at levels most people don't know exist. But nobody at LAX that day knew any of that. Nobody was supposed to. I need to tell you about Brianna, because this story isn't fair to her if I don't. She wasn't a bad person. I want to be clear about that. She was a product of what she'd been taught, the same way all of us are. She grew up in a family that measured worth in visible, quantifiable things: salary, title, address, the right last name attached to the right family. Her father was a real estate developer in Atlanta. Old money mixed with new ambition. Her mother ran in circles where people said things like, "What does he do?" before they ever asked, "What is he like?" Brianna was beautiful. The kind of beautiful that doesn't apologize for itself. She was sharp, got her MBA from Emory, built a career in marketing that she was genuinely proud of and had every right to be. She wasn't pretending to be something she wasn't. She was exactly what she was. The problem was that what she was and what I needed didn't match up the way I'd let myself believe. We met at a charity gala in Atlanta. I was there under a civilian cover, wearing a suit that Ray had picked out because Ray has better taste than me and has never let me forget it. Ray, Colonel Raymond Brooks, my commanding officer, and the closest thing I have to a brother who isn't blood, was the one who dragged me to the event in the first place. Something about it being good for us to exist in the world like normal people once in a while. Brianna walked over to me. That part matters. She came to me. We talked for 2 hours in a corner of that ballroom about everything and nothing. and she was funny and direct, and she looked at me like I was worth looking at, and I hadn't felt that in a long time. We exchanged numbers. She called first. For 2 years, we did what people do when they're trying to build something across distance and deployments and all the complications that come with the life I lived. I kept my work vague. She knew I was military, knew I was somewhere overseas, but she didn't know what I actually did, and I didn't tell her. I told myself it was for security reasons. That was true, but it wasn't the whole truth. The whole truth was simpler and more uncomfortable. I wanted to know. I needed to know if she loved me. Marcus, the man from Compton, who grew up on Willowbrook Avenue with a grandmother who kept a garden, or if she loved the idea of a soldier, the uniform, the story. I'd seen it happen to other guys, women who fell in love with the military and forgot there was a person inside it. I didn't want that. I wanted someone who would have chosen me in that cracked sidewalk neighborhood before any of this happened, so I held back. I gave her the man without the title, and she said she loved him. Or I thought she did. I proposed on her birthday, 2 years in a restaurant that Ray told me she'd mentioned wanting to try. She said yes. She cried. I thought that meant something. When they told me I was coming home, really coming home, end of active duty, transition to a consulting role that would keep me stateside, I made a decision. I would come back without the ceremony, without the announcement, without the display. Standard uniform, no medals pinned, no formal reception, just me, a duffel bag, and the woman I was going to marry. It was supposed to be a test, though I didn't call it that to myself at the time. I called it a homecoming, but looking back, I know what it was. I needed to see her face when she saw me as nothing more than what I looked like. A 32-year-old black man from Compton in a plain military uniform with a duffel bag and no obvious fanfare attached to his name. I needed to see what she did with that. The airport was loud, the way airports always are. That particular chaos of arrivals and reunions, and people moving in every direction at once. I'd been in the air for 19 hours. My back hurt. My eyes were burning. I smelled like a long flight and a longer year, and I didn't care. I was home. That was the only thing in my mind. I was home, and Brianna was supposed to be at the gate, and in a few hours I'd be sitting in a real chair, eating real food, and starting the part of my life I'd been working toward. I saw her before she saw me. She was standing near the arrival gate in a white dress and heels, hair done, looking like she'd come from a photo shoot. That was Brianna. She didn't do anything halfway. I noticed her scanning the crowd, and I watched her face go through something complicated when her eyes finally found me. Not joy, not relief. Something else. Something that moved too fast for me to fully name before she covered it with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. She walked toward me. I walked toward her. We were maybe 10 feet apart when I noticed she wasn't moving to hug me. She stopped, tilted her head slightly, looked me up and down in a way that made my chest go tight, even before she spoke. "You look tired," she said. 19 hours of travel, I said. "Give me a day." She nodded, but she still hadn't touched me, still hadn't closed the distance. And there was something in her posture, a stiffness, a hesitation, that I had enough training to read without wanting to. "Where's your—" She stopped, started again. I thought there'd be more. I thought there'd be some kind of ceremony or something. "Your friend, That Ray guy, he made it sound like it's just a homecoming, I said. Nothing official, right? She looked past my shoulder for a second, like she was checking to see if she'd missed something. Right. We walked to her car, mostly in silence. She made small talk. Atlanta weather, something about her job, something about a restaurant she wanted to try. I answered. I kept watching her hands on the steering wheel, the way she gripped it, the tight set of her jaw. By the time we got to the parking lot, she'd stopped talking entirely. She pulled the car to a stop on the upper deck, turned off the engine, and sat there for a moment with her hands in her lap and her eyes on the windshield. Brianna, I said. Marcus. She turned to look at me, and whatever she'd been holding behind her face, she let it go. I need to say something, and I need you to let me finish before you respond, okay? I said, okay. I waited, she said. I waited for 2 years while you were gone. 2 years of vague answers and classified this, and I can't tell you that. I was patient. I was understanding. I did everything right. And I kept telling myself it was going to be worth it. That when you came back, it was going to be. She stopped, pressed her lips together. I thought you were somebody, Marcus. The words landed somewhere behind my sternum. I thought, the way Ray talked about you, the way you carried yourself. I thought when you came home, there was going to be something to show for it. Something real. A rank, a title, a ceremony, something. And instead, she gestured at me, at the plain uniform, at the duffel bag in the back seat. This, I repeated. I can't do this. She said it quietly, almost gently, like she believed that the tone would soften what the words were doing. I can't build a life with someone who has nothing to show for 5 years. I have a career. I have a family with expectations. I have a life that requires a partner who is going somewhere. And she reached into her purse, set my ring on the center console between us. I'm sorry, Marcus. I really am. I looked at the ring. It was a good ring. I'd spent a long time picking it out. I'd thought about her hands when I chose it, the way she gestured when she talked, the way she wore jewelry like punctuation. I picked it up, turned it over once in my fingers. Then I put it in my jacket pocket, picked up my duffel bag, and got out of the car. I didn't say anything. There was nothing to say. Not nothing because I was speechless, but nothing because every word I could have used in that moment would have either given too much away or cost me something I wasn't willing to spend on a woman who had just told me exactly who she was. I stood on the upper deck of that parking structure for a long time after I heard her car pull away. The LA sky was doing what it does in the late afternoon. That specific shade of orange that looks almost unreal, like the city is performing itself. I could hear planes overhead, the distant sound of the freeway. Somewhere below me, a car alarm was going off, and nobody was paying attention to it. I had survived firefights in 4 different countries. I had made decisions in seconds that I would have to live with for the rest of my life. I had buried friends. I had carried strangers. I had done things in the dark that kept other people safe in the light without ever knowing my name. And I was standing in a parking lot in Los Angeles, feeling like I couldn't remember how to breathe. Not because I was broken. That's not what this is. I want to be clear about that. I didn't fall apart. I don't tell this story as a man who was destroyed by a woman in a parking lot. I tell it as a man who had spent years building armor so thick he'd almost forgotten there was something underneath it worth protecting. And in that moment, under that orange LA sky, with a ring in his jacket pocket and a duffel bag at his feet. That man felt the armor crack for the first time in a very long time. Not break, crack. There's a difference. I called a rideshare, gave the driver Big Mama's address, sat in the back seat with my bag on my lap, and watched the city move past the windows, the neighborhoods changing, the streets getting familiar, the palm trees and the corner stores, and the barber shops with the hand-painted signs. All of it exactly as I'd left it, and somehow more vivid than I remembered. The way things look when you've been away long enough to miss them without knowing you were missing them. Big Mama was on the porch when I pulled up. I don't know how she knew. She always knew. She stood up from her chair and came down the steps, and she didn't say a word, just walked straight to me and put her arms around me, the way she always had, with her whole body, like she was trying to confirm through contact that I was real and present and fully intact. "You're home," she said into my shoulder. "I'm home," I said, and I meant it in all the ways that mattered. Inside, she fed me. That's what Big Mama does. She feeds you, and she talks around the thing until you're ready to talk about it directly. And she has the patience of someone who has learned that forcing the words out of a person before they're ready only pushes the words deeper. She'd made red beans and rice and cornbread, and she sat across from me at that small kitchen table and watched me eat and asked me about the flight and told me about the neighbor's dog and the construction on the boulevard. When I'd eaten enough, she said simply, "Brianna." She gave the ring back, I said. Big Mama was quiet for a moment. Then she nodded once, slow, like she was confirming something she'd suspected. "Baby," she said, "some people can only see what's in front of them." I didn't answer. I helped her clear the table. I washed the dishes the way I used to when I was a kid, standing at the same sink in the same kitchen. And it was both exactly the same and completely different. The way you can be inside a memory while you're still living in the present. I went to my old room. Same twin bed, same window that looked out over the backyard where Big Mama kept her tomatoes. I sat on the edge of the bed in the dark, and I did not cry. Not because I was too strong to cry, but because the feeling in my chest was something denser than grief. It was more like sediment, layers of things settling. I hadn't expected to feel this way. That was the honest truth. I had prepared myself for multiple outcomes of the test I'd constructed, and one of them had been this one. The ring coming back, the car pulling away, and I had believed, in the abstract, that I was ready for it. I had been wrong, not because I still wanted to marry her. In the parking lot, with the words, still fresh, I had felt something clarify rather than break. The understanding that I had been in love with the possibility of Brianna more than the reality of her, and that the reality had been sitting there the whole time, visible if I'd let myself look directly at it. What I hadn't been prepared for was the quietness, the specific, heavy quietness of coming home to a life that was exactly the shape it had been before you left, and also, somehow, completely unfamiliar. 5 years. 5 years and a ring in my pocket and a duffel bag by the door of a room that smelled like the same laundry detergent Big Mama had used since I was 7 years old. I lay back on the bed, stared at the ceiling. My phone buzzed. One new message. Unknown number, though not unknown, because my body recognized it somehow before my brain caught up. the way certain things live in your muscles rather than your memory. I picked up the phone. Marcus, it's Alia. Big Mama told me you were back. You okay? I read the message 3 times. Outside the window, the neighborhood was settling into its evening sounds. Someone's TV, a car passing slow, children being called inside, the particular music of a Compton block winding down toward night. The tomatoes in the backyard were just visible in the last light, small and red and steady, the way Big Mama's things always were. I held the phone in both hands, and for the first time since I'd walked off that plane, I felt something loosen in my chest, just slightly, just enough. There are 2 kinds of silence. The first kind is empty, the silence of a room where nothing is happening and nothing is about to happen. The silence of waiting rooms and long drives, and the space between one thing ending and another thing not yet starting. That silence has no weight to it. It passes. The second kind is full. It presses against your ears. It has texture, temperature, the specific gravity of everything you're not saying out loud. That's the silence I sat inside when I read Alia's message. 3 sentences, her name at the end of them, and suddenly the room felt smaller and larger at the same time, the way a familiar space does when something shifts inside you that you can't immediately explain. I typed 3 different responses, deleted all 3. Then I set the phone face down on the mattress, put my arm over my eyes, and stared at the back of my own elbow for a long time, like it had an answer somewhere in it. She texted again 20 minutes later. You don't have to respond. Just wanted you to know. Someone's glad you made it back. That one I didn't delete. I read it until the screen timed out. She came over the next morning. I was in the backyard helping Big Mama with her tomatoes, which is to say, Big Mama was doing the actual work and I was handing her things and staying out of her way. When I heard the gate click, I turned around and there was Alia Washington, standing at the edge of the yard in scrubs, like she'd come straight from a shift, which she had. Hair pulled back, a little tired around the eyes, in the particular way of someone who has been awake since before the rest of the world decided to participate in the day. She looked at me for a second without saying anything. Then, "You're taller than I remember." "You've been saying that since we were 19, I said, "because it keeps being true." Big Mama made a sound behind me that was somewhere between a laugh and a comment she decided to keep to herself. She patted my arm once, picked up her basket, and disappeared into the house with the unhurried efficiency of someone who knows exactly what they're engineering and has zero interest in being obvious about it. Alia and I sat on the back steps. She had a coffee she'd brought from somewhere. She offered me some, and I took it even though it was already barely warm, because accepting it felt like the right thing to do. We talked the way people talk when they haven't seen each other in years, but the muscle memory of the friendship is still there, intact, just waiting to be used again. Carefully at first, then less carefully, then not carefully at all. She told me about nursing, about the community hospital where she worked, St. Anthony's, over on Central, about the funding cuts that had gutted the pediatrics ward and the staff they'd lost because of it, and the way she'd watched her department absorb the weight of those losses without anyone above her seeming to particularly care. She talked about it the way she talked about everything that mattered to her, directly, without performing anger, just laying the facts out in a line and letting the line speak for itself. I listened. I asked questions. I noticed things. The way she chose words. The gap between what she said and what her face said when she said it. The particular way she went quiet before saying something true. "And you?" she said finally. "5 years. You don't have to tell me what you can't tell me. But how are you?" I thought about the honest answer to that question. "Figuring it out," I said. She nodded, like that was a complete sentence. Because with her, it was. We didn't talk about Brianna. Not that morning, but I knew she knew. Big Mama had told her something, or the neighborhood grapevine had already done its work, the way it always did. She didn't bring it up, and I was grateful. Not because I couldn't talk about it, but because it was good to sit with someone who didn't need it to be the first thing we discussed. When she left, she paused at the gate, turned back. "Same number," she said, meaning hers. "If you want to talk, or not talk, either one." What I didn't know, those first few days back, was that Brianna had already started talking. I found out through Ray. He called on a Tuesday. Ray always called on Tuesdays. I have no idea why. It's just the day he chose and stuck with. And he led with logistics, the way he always did, before getting to the actual point. "There's some stuff circulating," he said. "What kind of stuff?" "Her people. Instagram, mostly. You know how Atlanta works." I knew how Atlanta worked. I pulled it up after we got off the phone. It wasn't hard to find. Brianna's circle was small but loud. A cluster of women who documented their lives in real time with the precision of people who had decided that visibility was the same thing as value. The posts were indirect, the way those things always are. No name, no photo, just language designed to be understood by everyone who already knew and deniable to everyone who didn't. Came home with nothing to show, nothing. 5 years and a duffel bag, sis. You deserve someone who's going somewhere. Glad some of us know our worth. The uniform doesn't make the man. Below those, in the comments, agreement, affirmation, a long chain of responses that each added a little more weight to the version of me they were building. A man who had wasted years. A man who had nothing. A man who had failed some basic test that women of a certain ambition were right to apply. I read it once, closed the app, set my phone down. Then I went outside and ran 6 miles in the afternoon heat, because that has always been the way I process the things I can't control, by putting my body through something that requires my full attention and leaving no room for anything else to exist alongside it. My feet on the pavement, the specific weight of the air, the streets of Compton scrolling past like something I had memorized so deeply it played behind my eyes, whether I was here or 10,000 miles away. When I got back, Big Mama was on the porch. She looked at me, said nothing. "I'm fine," I said. "I know," she said. "I just like looking at you when you're home. Here is something most people don't understand about the work I did. The skills don't turn off. You spend enough years learning to read a room, to identify leverage points, to see 3 moves ahead in any situation. And then you come home, and those skills don't disappear just because the context changes. They just redirect. They find her new applications. They start operating on civilian problems with the same quiet efficiency they brought to everything else. I am telling you this so that what I'm about to describe makes sense. Within 2 weeks of being back in Compton, I had a complete picture of the situation at St. Anthony's Hospital. Funding cuts from a municipal contract that had been allowed to lapse. A department head who had tried and failed to get in front of the right people. A grant application that had been submitted to the wrong foundation and rejected on a technicality. I had Ray make a call. Ray, in addition to being my commanding officer and the person who has covered for me in more situations than either of us would care to itemize, is also extraordinarily well connected in ways that have nothing to do with the military. His wife works in healthcare policy. His college roommate runs a foundation out of DC, and he collects favors the way some people collect shoes. He made one call on a Wednesday morning. By Friday, St. Anthony's had a meeting scheduled with the right people. Alia texted me that Saturday. Something happened at work. Someone connected the hospital with a grant foundation. Nobody knows who. The department head is losing her mind in the best possible way. Did you have anything to do with this? I looked at the message for a moment. No idea what you're talking about. I sent back. 3 seconds. Marcus, get some sleep, Alia. You're impossible. I put the phone in my pocket and went to help Big Mama with her garden. Darnell Washington came to the house on a Thursday evening. I saw him coming up the walk from the window. That particular walk of his that I remembered from childhood. The one that meant he had made a decision and was arriving to deliver it rather than negotiate it. He was a big man, broad through the shoulders, with the kind of face that had aged into its authority rather than softened away from it. He'd always intimidated me a little when I was a kid, not because he was cruel, but because he was exactly as serious as he appeared. And that is a rare and slightly unsettling quality in a person. Big Mama let him in, offered him coffee. He accepted, because you always accepted Big Mama's coffee, and the three of us sat in the living room with the kind of careful politeness that precedes difficult conversations. He didn't take long to get there. My daughter has a good life, he said. Stable job, savings. She's built something. I'm not going to watch her put that at risk behind somebody who doesn't have their feet under them yet. Darnell, Big Mama started. He held up a hand, not rude, just firm. I'm not saying he's a bad person. I'm saying she deserves somebody who is ready. And I don't know what he's doing, or where he's going, or what he's got planned. And neither does she. And I'm not comfortable with that. I let him finish. I had learned, over years of operating in situations where what you didn't say mattered more than what you did, that the urge to defend yourself immediately was almost always the wrong instinct. So, I waited until he was done, and then I said, "You're right that you don't know. I understand that." He looked at me. "I'm not asking you to trust me," I said. "I'm asking you to watch, that's all. Just watch." He studied me for a long moment with the particular focus of a man who had spent 40 years learning to read people and was applying that skill deliberately. Then he stood up, thanked Big Mama for the coffee, and walked back out the front door. Big Mama waited until she heard his car start. "You handled that well," she said. "I've been in harder rooms," I said. "I know," she said. "That's why I'm not worried." The situation with Darnell's job came to my attention through Aaliyah, who mentioned it the way she mentioned things she was worried about, casually, embedded in the middle of other sentences, hoping I wouldn't notice how carefully she'd placed it. "Dad's been having a rough time at the depot," she said one evening. We were sitting on her front steps. The old steps, the same chain-link fence, the same garden her mother had kept and that Aaliyah maintained now with the same patient attention. Some management restructuring. They've been cutting hours. "What kind of work is he looking for?" I said. She tilted her head at me. "Marcus, I'm just asking." "You're just asking the way you were just asking about the hospital." I said nothing. She was quiet for a moment. Then, quietly, transportation logistics. That's his background. 22 years of it. I nodded, changed the subject. She let me. 11 days later, through 3 layers of separation that I constructed specifically so that no line pointed back to me, Darnell Washington had an interview with a regional logistics company that was expanding their fleet management division. He got the job. Better hours, better pay, benefits he hadn't had in years. Alia texted me the day he got the offer. Dad got a job. Out of nowhere. A recruiter reached out to him directly. He doesn't know who sent his name. That's great, I sent back. A pause. Longer than usual. Is it ever going to stop being pointless to ask you? Probably not, I said. Then I'm just going to say thank you and let you pretend you don't know what I'm thanking you for. That seems efficient. Good night, Marcus. Good night, Alia. Brianna called on a Sunday. I almost didn't answer. I stood there, watching her name on the screen through 2 full rings, and had a complete internal argument with myself in the time it took most people to blink. And then I picked up, because I had never been someone who avoids the things he'd rather not face. Hey, she said. Hey. A pause. I could hear her breathing, slightly unsteady. I've been thinking about you. I waited. I've been... Another pause. When she spoke again, her voice had shifted into something softer, a register I recognized from the early months we were together, before the distance and the vagueness had worn us both down. I think I made a mistake, Marcus. I panicked. I saw the uniform and I didn't see. I wasn't thinking clearly, and I said things Brianna, let me finish. You can finish, I said. I'm not stopping you. She took a breath. I miss you. I don't think I understood what I had until a short, frustrated exhale. I know I hurt you, and I want to fix it. I sat with what she'd said, gave it the consideration it deserved, which I think surprised her, because she'd probably expected either immediate rejection or immediate softening, and I gave her neither. I hear you, I said finally. Is that all you're going to say? For right now, yes. Marcus, I'm not angry at you, Brianna. I want to be real clear about that. I'm not holding what happened against you, but you made a decision in that parking lot based on what you believed to be true, and I need you to sit with that for a while. What that decision was, and what it told you about yourself, because I've been sitting with it. A silence stretched out between us, long enough that I could hear, faintly, street noise on her end. Atlanta in the afternoon. I knew that sound. So that's it, she said. I don't know yet, I said. I'm being honest. She hung up first. I held the phone for a second, then set it on the table, and went to the kitchen to find something to do with my hands. What happened between Alia and me is harder to describe than anything else in this story, because it didn't happen in one moment or even a series of dramatic moments. It accumulated, the way water accumulates, gradually, persistently, until one day you look down and you're standing somewhere deep enough that you can't remember exactly how you got there, only that each step made complete sense at the time. We got into a rhythm, morning texts, small things, observations, the particular humor she'd always had that ran quiet and dry and caught you off guard. Evenings on those front steps when her shifts ended and my days wound down, talking the way we'd talked when we were 17 and the world was still something we were building theories about. Some nights we drove, just drove, through the neighborhood and out toward the coast and back again, the windows down, whatever she had on the radio, not needing to fill every silence. She told me things about the patients she couldn't stop thinking about after her shifts ended, about her mother, who had passed 3 years ago from a stroke that came without warning on a Tuesday morning in February, the kind of loss that remakes a person in ways that take years to fully map, about the specific loneliness of being the person everyone else leans on, at work, at home, in her family, and how infrequently anyone thought to ask if the ground under her was solid too. I listened. Not the way I had learned to listen operationally, where you're building a profile and cataloging information, but the way I had almost forgotten I was capable of listening, without an agenda, without a next move. One night, she fell asleep on Big Mama's couch, watching a movie. Neither of us was really watching, and I sat across the room and looked at her sleeping. The easy, trusting way she'd let herself go under, her feet curled up, Big Mama's old throw blanket pulled up to her chin, and I felt something I hadn't expected to feel, something quiet and clean and entirely without complication, which is the rarest kind of feeling I know. I didn't say anything about it, not yet. I was not a man who moved fast on things that mattered. But Darnell Washington came to the house again, about a month after the first visit. He sat down across from me at the kitchen table. Big Mama made herself scarce. He looked at me for a long time. "Something changed at my job," he said. "I heard that," I said carefully. "Something changed at the hospital where my daughter works." I said nothing. He leaned forward, elbows on the table, and looked at me with those eyes that had been reading people for 4 decades. "I don't know how. I don't know who. But I'm not a stupid man, Marcus. And I'm not blind." The kitchen clock ticked. "I told you to watch," I said. Something shifted in his face. Not softening, exactly, but a redistribution of weight. The way a door looks when the lock turns. He sat back, picked up his coffee cup, set it down without drinking from it. "You're something else," he said, quietly, to himself as much as to me. And then he didn't say anything else, and I didn't say anything else. And it was the most complete conversation I'd had with another man in a long time. I was on the back porch one evening, 3 weeks after Darnell's second visit, on a night warm enough that the neighborhood smelled like cut grass and someone's grill running late, when my phone rang. Ray. On a Thursday, which was unusual. "You need to start preparing yourself," he said, skipping the logistics for once. "They've confirmed the date, 6 weeks out, DC. Ray, I know what you're going to say. Then you know my answer, Marcus." His voice did something it rarely did. It got careful. "You can't keep the lid on this forever. People are already talking. That piece in the Defense Journal last month, they described the operation without naming you, but it's not going to take long. And when it comes out on its own, without you controlling it, it's going to be a whole different thing than if you stand in that room and own it." I looked out at Big Mama's garden. The tomatoes were coming in strong this year. 6 weeks, I said. 6 weeks. The secretary will be there. The president's office has confirmed attendance. Marcus, this is the Medal of Honor. You don't get to just, "I know what it is." "Then act like it." I said I'd think about it. He said thinking about it was not the same as preparing. I said I knew that too. We went back and forth like that for another few minutes. The particular inefficiency of 2 men who know each other too well to pretend. And then he hung up. and I sat with the phone in my hand and the evening air on my face. Inside, Big Mama was moving around the kitchen, the specific rhythm of her footsteps on that floor, a sound I had catalogued at age 6 and never lost, moved through the walls and into the porch and settled somewhere in my chest. 6 weeks. 6 weeks. And the thing I had kept buried for reasons I had told myself were practical, but were probably also something else. Fear, maybe, or the particular superstition of a man who had learned not to let good things be visible before they were safe, would surface, would be public, would change the shape of everything around me. I thought about Aaliyah. I thought about the way she'd looked at me on the steps last Tuesday when I'd said something that made her laugh, really laugh, the kind that takes over her whole face. And for just a second, she'd looked at me the way I used to see people look at things they were trying to memorize. I thought about what that look would mean when she knew, and I thought about what it would mean if I told her first, before the ceremony, before the public announcement, in the quiet of an ordinary evening on her front steps or in Big Mama's living room or driving with the windows down, just told her and watched what she did with it. I thought about that for a long time. The porch light was on now, moths circling it with the same committed, pointless energy they always brought to that task. Swear up the block, a kid was laughing. The high specific sound of someone who doesn't know yet that there will be nights that feel like this one. Warm and full of something unresolved, and weighted with decisions that don't have clean answers. I set the phone on the railing, picked it back up, put it in my pocket, walked inside. The article was 4 sentences long. That was the thing nobody warned you about. The way the world reassembles itself around you, not in some dramatic announcement, but in increments so small you almost miss each one individually. 4 sentences in a defense industry publication that most civilians had never heard of, buried in the middle of a longer piece about military honors and policy reform. No name, no photograph, just a description of an upcoming ceremony, a reference to a decorated Special Forces commander with an unprecedented operational record, and the words, Medal of Honor, sitting there in the middle of the page, like a door someone had left slightly open. Ray texted me a link to it at 6:47 on a Wednesday morning with a message that said only, "Clock's running." I read it twice, folded my phone into my pocket, went back to making coffee. Big Mama watched me from the kitchen table with the specific expression she used when she was deciding whether to speak or let the situation breathe on its own. She let it breathe. "You need to eat something," she said finally. "I'm making coffee." That's not what I said. I made eggs. I ate them. We didn't discuss the article or the ceremony or the 6 weeks that were now 5 weeks and counting. We talked about whether the hardware store on Wilmington had changed ownership. She'd noticed different signage, and whether the summer heat was coming earlier than usual this year. Normal things. The kind of conversation that holds the shape of a morning in place when other things are trying to pull it loose. It was only after I'd washed the dishes and she'd gone to tend her garden that I let myself sit with what I knew was already in motion. The article was vague, but vague was only a temporary condition. Someone would read it. Someone would start cross-referencing, and in a world where information moved the way it did now, fast, lateral, finding every gap, vague had a half-life measured in days. The question was no longer whether, it was when, and who would find out in which order, and what each of them would do with it. Brianna found the article on a Friday. I know this because she stopped texting me after the Sunday call. A silence I'd noticed but hadn't examined too closely. The way you don't examine a sore tooth when you're not ready for what the examination might confirm. Then on Friday afternoon, my phone lit up with a number I didn't recognize. And when I answered it, the voice on the other end wasn't Brianna, but someone who identified herself as working for a private research firm and wanted to know if I had any comment on my upcoming recognition. I hung up, called Ray. She hired somebody, I said. A pause on his end, the particular pause of a man recalibrating. How do you know? Because someone just called me from a research firm asking for comment. Marcus, she's been working backward from the article. She's looking for the anonymous donor in Compton. She's connecting dots. He was quiet for a moment, then. How long do you think she's been at it? A week, maybe more. Another silence. You know what this means. It means the window is smaller than I thought, I said. It means, Ray said, and his voice had that particular flatness it got when he was about to say the thing neither of us wanted to say, that you need to stop waiting and make a decision. About Alia, about the ceremony, about all of it. Because right now, you're letting the story write itself. And brother, you know better than that. I did know better than that. I just hadn't figured out how to do what I knew yet. She came to the hospital on a Tuesday. Alia told me later, her voice doing something careful with each word, like she was handling something that might break if she set it down wrong. Brianna had walked into the lobby of St. Anthony's at noon. Not the emergency entrance, not the administrative wing, but the main lobby where the staff came through between shifts. She'd asked for Alia by name at the front desk, said she was a friend, waited 15 minutes on the bench by the water fountain with the composure of someone who had practiced looking unbothered. When Alia came down, she said. Brianna stood up and smiled the kind of smile that doesn't reach the eyes but is technically a smile, and said, I just need 10 minutes. They sat in the courtyard off the east wing, the small one with the concrete planters and the bench that got shade in the afternoon. She was very polished, Alia told me, like she'd rehearsed. What did she say? Alia looked at me steadily. She said you were using me, that you do this. Find someone soft, someone trusting, someone you know won't ask the right questions, and you make them feel chosen. She said it's a pattern. She said she was trying to warn me before I got hurt the way she did. The courtyard of St. Anthony's, concrete planters, afternoon shade. And, I said, and I told her I appreciated her concern. Alia paused, and then I walked back inside. But she looked at me with the directness that had always been the thing about her I couldn't get around. There was no performance in it, no strategic opacity, just the clear, unfiltered fact of what she was thinking delivered straight. But she planted something, she said. I know that's what she was trying to do. I know that. And I still couldn't stop thinking about it for the rest of my shift. She exhaled. Is there something you're not telling me, Marcus? The courtyard between us felt suddenly enormous, even though it was only the distance across her kitchen table. I wanted to answer. I had the words assembled. I'd had them assembled for weeks in different configurations, tested them against different moments, and found different reasons each time why the moment wasn't quite right. But sitting across from her, in the particular honesty of her kitchen, under the particular weight of what she'd just told me, I felt something I hadn't expected. The reason that had always stopped me wasn't strategy. It wasn't protecting the operation or controlling the timeline. It was fear, plain and structural, running through the whole foundation. If I told her, I would never know if what came next was real. If she stayed after knowing, was that because she was Aliyah, the girl from Willowbrook Avenue, who had always seen me, or because she was human, and humans respond to status the way they respond to gravity? I was a man who had navigated classified operations in hostile environments without flinching, and I was afraid of a woman at a kitchen table. There are things, I said carefully, that I can't talk about yet, not because I'm hiding who I am, but because I need to know what we are first. She was quiet for a long time. That's not nothing, she said finally. No, I said, it's not nothing. She looked down at her hands on the table, then back up at me. Okay, she said, just that. Okay, but it sat between us differently than it would have a month ago, with a small, added weight, invisible but present. The seed Brianna had planted, doing exactly what Brianna had intended it to do. I drove home that night with both hands on the wheel and the radio off, which is how I drive when I'm working through something I don't have an answer to yet. Brianna came to the house on a Saturday morning. I wasn't home. I'd gone to run. I needed the 6 miles more than usual that week, and when I came back up Willowbrook, I saw her car parked out front. Silver, new model, Atlanta plates. She was sitting on the porch steps. Big Mama was in the doorway behind her, arms crossed, watching her the way she watched weather systems, with complete attention and no particular alarm. Brianna saw me coming from halfway down the block. She stood up, and something in her face broke out of the rehearsed composure for just a moment. Something younger and less certain, before she got it back. I needed to see you, she said when I reached the porch. You could have called. You would have had time to decide not to answer. Said without accusation, just fact. I looked at her. She'd dressed carefully. Not the white dress of the airport, but something quieter, considered, like she understood that presentation had been part of her first mistake and was trying to correct for it. She looked tired in a way she hadn't before. The kind of tired that comes from spending weeks in a mental space where you keep trying to make the numbers add up differently, and they won't. I know about the article, she said. Okay, I know you're the one they're writing about. I know it's bigger than anything you ever told me. She pressed her lips together. I know I walked away from something I didn't understand. And her voice broke a fraction. She caught it, held it. I'm asking for a chance to make that right. Big Mama stepped forward then. I had not heard her move. Big Mama could move without sound when she chose to, a fact I had verified across 32 years of living with her. She stepped forward and placed herself at the top of the porch steps and looked down at Brianna with an expression that contained no cruelty and no softness, just the absolute precision of a woman who had earned the right to say exactly what she was about to say. Baby, she said, and her voice was quiet and complete and left no space for argument. You had your chance, and you looked at my grandson, who has given more to this country than you will ever know, and you handed him back his ring in a parking lot because he didn't come with a sign around his neck telling you what he was worth. She paused. Let that sit. You didn't want him. You wanted what came with him. And those are two very different things. Brianna opened her mouth, closed it. I'm not telling you you're a bad person, Big Mama continued. I'm telling you the door you're standing in front of is closed, and no amount of knocking is going to change the person standing on the other side of it. She looked at her for one more moment. Then, with the finality of someone folding a piece of paper and putting it away, "You should head on home now." I didn't say anything. There was nothing left to say. Big Mama had said all of it, with more precision and more grace than I could have managed. Brianna stood there for another 3 seconds, looking at me, waiting for something to move on my face. A crack, a softening, any sign that the door was less closed than Big Mama had described. Nothing moved. She picked up her bag, walked to her car, drove away. Big Mama looked at me. "Go shower," she said. "You've been running." I went inside. The photograph surfaced on a Thursday. I don't know who took it. Someone at the interagency briefing 2 years ago. A logistics meeting in a non-secure venue, which meant cameras were technically permissible, which meant someone with a long lens and a reason to use it had done exactly that. The photo was low resolution and poorly framed, but it showed me in full dress uniform, medals visible, the insignia legible to anyone who knew what they were looking at. It went up on a military veterans forum first. Then someone with a larger platform shared it with a caption, "Anyone know who this is?" Article says, "Medal of Honor coming. Face seems familiar." By Thursday evening, it had 3,000 shares. By Friday morning, someone had made the connection to the anonymous donor who had appeared in Compton, not with certainty, with the particular speculative energy of online communities presenting possibilities as probability. Could be. Look at the timeline. This would make sense. Ray called at 7 a.m. 3 days, he said, maybe 4. After that, it doesn't matter what you planned, the story is going to tell itself. I know. Marcus, talk to her tonight. I said I would. But the day moved the way days do when you're bracing for an evening. Too fast in the wrong directions and too slow in the ones that mattered. I had a call with a DoD contractor in the afternoon about the transition role. A long conversation that required full attention and got it. And by the time it was over, the sun was already doing its late day lean toward the west, and I had 3 texts I hadn't answered. 2 from Ray, 1 from a number I didn't recognize, which turned out to be a journalist from a paper I won't name, who had already connected my name to the photograph and wanted a statement before publication. I called Ray back, told him about the journalist. Days just became hours, he said. I know. Marcus, I know, Ray. I sat with the phone after I hung up. The journalist's number still on the screen, the photograph already circulating. 5 weeks of careful, deliberate quiet, about to become irrelevant in the way that all carefully maintained silences eventually become irrelevant, not with a dramatic collapse, but with a simple shift in the environment that makes the silence impossible to sustain. I thought about Alia at her kitchen table. Is there something you're not telling me? And me saying, not yet. And the thing in her eyes that had shifted just slightly. Not distrust, not quite, but the beginning of the space where distrust could grow if the answer stayed not yet long enough. I picked up my phone, called her. 3 rings. Then her voice, a little breathless, like she'd run for the phone. Hey, are you working tomorrow night? No, off at 4. Can I take you somewhere? Dinner. Somewhere real, not just the steps. A pause. Small enough that another person might not have noticed it. I noticed it. Yeah, she said. Okay, yeah. We made a time. Hung up. I set the phone on the nightstand and looked at the ceiling with the particular clarity of someone who has finally made the decision they knew they were always going to make and is now simply waiting for the moment to catch up with the intention. I would tell her tomorrow, before the ceremony, before the journalists, before anything else got to her first. Tomorrow night, at a real table, in a real place, I would tell Aaliyah Washington exactly who I was and what I had done and why I had kept it from her. And then I would sit there and watch what she did with all of it. And whatever she did would be real. And I could live with real in a way I couldn't live with anything else. I had made peace with that. What I hadn't planned for was her call at 11:47 that same night. I was almost asleep when the phone rang. Her name on the screen. I sat up, answered. Aaliyah. Marcus. Her voice was different. Not panicked, not angry. Something more precise than either of those things. The voice of someone holding themselves very still, because the alternative was unclear. I need to ask you something, and I need you to not deflect. Okay, there's a photo going around online. A pause. A man in full dress uniform. Medals I don't know the names of. Someone in the comments is saying the anonymous donor in Compton, the one who helped the hospital, who helped my dad. They're saying it's him. They're saying it's you. Her voice stayed steady through all of it, steady in a way that cost her something. Marcus, who are you? The question sat in the air between us. 3 words. The simplest possible construction, and the whole weight of 6 months inside them. I sat on the edge of my bed in the dark. My old room, the same window. Big Mama's tomatoes invisible in the night beyond the glass. I started to type, my thumb moving before I remembered we were on a call. I switched to text without saying goodbye. Typed something. Deleted it. Typed something else. Deleted that. The cursor blinking in the empty message field with the impartial patience of a thing that doesn't understand what it's waiting for. Finally, 1 sentence. 7 words. Come to the ceremony on Saturday. Please. I hit send, watched the screen. 3 dots appeared. Stopped. Appeared again. Stopped. Then, nothing. The phone sat dark and silent in my hand. And outside the window, the neighborhood was quiet in the way it only got past midnight. And somewhere in that quiet, Aaliyah Washington was sitting with my 7 words and deciding what to do with them. And I had no more moves to make. No contingencies. No fallback position. Just the weight. Just the dark. Just the particular exposure of a man who had hidden behind his own story for so long that the moment of being seen, really seen, felt like standing in open ground with no cover on any side. 14 medals. I counted them that morning the way I had never counted them before. Not as a record, not as a measure of anything, but because my hands needed something precise to do while the rest of me caught up to the day. Each one pinned in its designated position on the left chest of the dress blues, in the specific order that the army had decided meant something, that someone somewhere had determined represented the correct hierarchy of sacrifice and accomplishment. 14. Some of them I hadn't thought about in years. Some of them I thought about more than I would ever admit to anyone. The mirror in Big Mama's bathroom was small. I'd had to angle myself to see the full uniform, stepping back until my shoulders touched the door frame. And even then, I could only take in half of it at a time. The man looking back at me from that glass was familiar, but not entirely comfortable. Like running into a version of yourself you'd set aside in a drawer and forgotten, and finding him still there, still intact, not diminished by the time away, but perhaps more complicated than you'd remembered. Big Mama appeared in the doorway behind me. She looked at me in the mirror for a long moment without speaking. Then she reached up and straightened one of the medals. Fractionally, barely necessary, more ritual than correction, and kept her hand on my chest for a second afterward. Your grandfather would have lost his mind, she said quietly. In a good way. In the best way. She patted my chest once. Firm. Final. Go. Ray had arranged a car. Black SUV, government plates. Driver who understood that the 35 minutes from Compton to downtown Los Angeles was not a conversation-required situation. I sat in the back and watched the city move past the windows the way I'd watched it on the drive home from the airport. The neighborhoods layering into each other, the skyline assembling itself on the horizon. But it looked different this time. Not because anything outside had changed, but because the man looking at it had. My phone had 47 notifications. I'd turned the sound off at 6 a.m. The photo had been picked up by 2 major outlets overnight. Not with my name attached yet, but with enough detail that the gap between anonymous and identified was closing by the hour. Ray had texted at 5:30. Reporters at the venue. Managed. But Marcus. No more holding. I had read that one, then put the phone face down on the nightstand and gone to make coffee and think about the 14 medals in the box on the dresser. Aaliyah had not responded to my message. I had checked. I had not checked obsessively. Or I had told myself I was not checking obsessively. And the line between those two things had gotten blurry. Somewhere around 2 in the morning, when I'd looked at my phone for the 4th time in 40 minutes and registered again that there were no new messages from her. Nothing. The 3 dots had appeared and disappeared, and that had been it. And the silence after that was different from the silence I had described at the beginning of all this. It wasn't empty, and it wasn't full. It was suspended, like a held breath, like a question mark made of time. She might come, she might not. Both were real possibilities, and I had decided, somewhere in the narrow hours before dawn, that I would not let myself collapse into superstition about which was more likely. Whatever she chose, she was choosing from who she actually was, and who she actually was had always been, to me, the most trustworthy thing in the room. I could live with whatever she chose. The car stopped. Ray was waiting outside the venue entrance in his own dress uniform, medals lined up with the geometric precision he had always maintained and always would. He looked at me when I got out, and something in his face did the thing it rarely did. It relaxed, just slightly, the way a man's face relaxes when he sees a thing he's been waiting to see finally arrive. There he is, he said. Don't, I said. The ghost, he said anyway, because Ray has never once in our entire history not said the thing I told him not to say. We went inside. The venue was the kind of space that announces itself. High ceilings, the particular acoustic quality of a room designed for ceremony. The specific tension of 200 people who knew they were present for something that would be referenced later. Military personnel in dress uniform, civilians in suits and formal wear, officials from 3 different agencies, someone from the secretary's office. 2 reporters corralled in the designated press area on the far right. Camera operators behind them. I moved through it the way I moved through any room, taking in the geometry, the exits, the faces, the clusters of conversation that shifted when I walked past. Some people recognized me immediately. Some didn't. The ones who did had the grace, largely, to manage their reactions. A nod, a straightened spine, a murmured word to whoever was standing next to them. Ray positioned himself on my left and slightly behind, which was unnecessary in this context and completely characteristic of him. I was scanning the room. I was not scanning for the officials. I was not scanning for the press. I was scanning in one specific direction, for one specific person, and I was doing it with the same controlled focus I brought to the kind of scanning that had kept me alive in places with far higher stakes than a convention center ballroom, which was a fact that told me something about the specific gravity of what I was looking for. I did not see her. The room filled, seats assigned, the program beginning to take shape, Ray steering me through the pre-ceremony protocol with the practiced efficiency of a man who had managed complex situations for 2 decades and treated all of them, fundamentally, as logistics problems with solutions. I shook hands. I accepted introductions. I answered questions in the minimal way that ceremony allows. Yes, thank you. Honored to be here. While the other part of my attention held its position, methodically checking each face near the back of the room, the standing area to the left, the gallery that ran along the far wall. 20 minutes before the ceremony started, I saw Brianna. She was near the press area, which was not where guests were supposed to be, which told me she had found a way to be more precisely positioned than her invitation likely permitted, which was, I had to admit, consistent with who she was. She was in a dress the color of deep red, and she was talking to someone I didn't recognize with the relaxed authority of a person who has decided that confidence is indistinguishable from permission. She hadn't seen me yet. I looked at her for 3 seconds, registered everything, the deliberate outfit, the calculated positioning, the fact that her presence here, like her visit to the hospital, like her visit to Big Mama's porch, was not accidental and was not casual. She had come for the confirmation she'd been working toward for weeks, and she had dressed for what came after it. I turned away from her. And in the turning, in the re-sweeping of the back of the room, I found what I'd been looking for. Alia Washington was standing near the far left wall, close enough to the exit that the direction could have been ambiguous, far enough into the room that it wasn't. She was wearing a deep green dress I'd never seen, hair down in a way she rarely wore it, and she looked. The only honest word I have is serious. Not cold, not afraid. Serious. The way she looked when she was at work, and something required her full attention, and she was giving it. She was looking directly at me. I don't know how long she'd been there. I don't know when she'd arrived, or what she'd seen from that position near the left wall, before I found her in the crowd. What I know is that when our eyes met across that room, across 200 people, and all the accumulated weight of 6 months and 5 years, and a childhood on a block in Compton, she didn't look away. Neither did I. Ray touched my arm. 2 minutes, he said. They need you at the front. I walked to the front. I will tell you what the citation said, briefly, because it matters. 3 classified operations across 2 theaters, actions that had been redacted from public record, but preserved in internal documentation. A specific engagement in which the decisions I made under conditions I cannot describe protected the lives of 11 American personnel and disrupted a network that would have caused. The citation used the word catastrophic, harm to civilians. The words had been written by someone who had never been in any of those places and was working from reports that could only capture the skeleton of what had happened, not the weight or the smell or the specific quality of a second that stretches into something longer than itself, when the decision inside it is the kind you can't take back. But they were the right words. They were as close as words could get. The Secretary of Defense read them aloud in a room that had gone so completely quiet I could hear the ventilation system running. And when he finished reading them, he looked at me and said something. I will not repeat here, because some things are between the men in a room and the four walls holding them. Then the medal went around my neck. The room stood. I want to be honest with you. I did not expect it to land the way it did. I had prepared myself for ceremony, for protocol, for the formal machinery of recognition. I hadn't prepared myself for the specific physical weight of that room standing up, for the sound of it, for the way it moved through me in a place I had kept armored for so long that the sensation was almost disorienting. Not ego, not pride exactly, something older and less nameable. The feeling of being, for the first time in a very long time, fully visible and not afraid of it. I found Aliyah in the crowd immediately. She was standing too. Her hands were clasped in front of her, and her eyes were bright in a way that told me she had been maintaining a level of composure that was costing her something real. And when she saw me looking at her, she pressed her lips together and gave me one small, deliberate nod, like she was confirming something she'd already decided. On the far right, Brianna stood very still with her hands at her sides. I will not pretend I didn't look. I will not pretend that some part of me didn't take note of what was written on her face in that moment. The full understanding, arriving all at once, of every choice she had made in every conversation we'd had over the past 6 months. And what those choices meant now that the thing she'd been chasing had revealed its actual dimensions. I don't tell you that to be cruel to her. I tell you that because it was real, and this is a true story, and the true version of this moment has her standing there in a red dress with that look on her face, and then, quietly, without making a scene, with the particular dignity that had always been the best thing about her, walking toward the exit. Ray watched her go, looked at me, said nothing. I stepped off the platform. The post-ceremony had the loosened energy of all such events. The structure giving way to conversation, drinks appearing from somewhere, the room rearranging itself into smaller configurations. A reporter materialized at my right shoulder within 4 minutes, which was actually longer than I'd expected. Commander James, can you tell us what this recognition means to you? I gave them something real and brief, the kind of answer that respects the question without feeding the machine any more than necessary. Then another question, and another, and I answered them with the portion of my attention they required, while the rest of me tracked the far left wall. She was still there. Then the reporter, young, earnest, with the particular energy of someone who had done her research and was proud of it, asked, "Is there anyone here tonight who you'd want to recognize? Someone who's been part of the journey?" I looked directly at her for the first time in the interview. Then I looked past her, deliberately, across the room. "Yeah," I said, "there is." I excused myself. Ray made a sound behind me that I chose not to interpret. Aliyah watched me cross the room. She didn't move toward me. She didn't step back. She just stood at that left wall in her green dress and watched me come, the way she had always watched things that mattered, with full attention and no performance layered on top of it. I stopped in front of her. The room was loud around us, in the specific way that crowds are loud. Present, but not intrusive. Background noise that paradoxically creates its own privacy. You came, I said. You said please. A pause. You never say please. I needed you here. Her eyes moved over the uniform, the medals. Took it in with the careful attention she brought to things she was trying to understand. Then she looked back at my face, and her expression did something complicated. Not anger, not awe, but something in between that was working itself toward clarity. How long? She said. 6 months of hiding it from you. 5 years of the rest. Why? Not why did you hide it? Just why? She always asked the right question. Because every woman I've ever told has changed, I said. The way they looked at me changed. The way they talked to me. The way they decided what I meant to them. I held her eyes. I didn't want that with you. I couldn't. I stopped, started again. You knew me before any of this. You knew me when I was nobody from Willowbrook, with nothing but a plan I wasn't sure was going to work. And I needed to know if that person was still the one you were showing up for. She was quiet for a moment. The room moved around us. The hospital, she said. My dad. Yes. You did all of that without telling me. Yes. You were protecting people who were important to me without taking credit for it. Yes. She nodded slowly, looked down at her hands for a second, then back up. And Brianna. She wanted the title. She proved it. That's the whole story. She came here tonight. I know. She left. Another beat of quiet. Aaliyah's jaw moved slightly, the way it did when she was working through something with the full force of her actual brain, rather than just the surface of it. Marcus, she said, I am not going to pretend that this doesn't change things, because it does. Not what I think of you, but the shape of things, the context. She exhaled. I need you to understand that I would have been here if you'd told me on the first day. If you'd sat down on those steps and said, Aaliyah, I'm a Special Forces commander. Here's what that means. I would have been exactly where I am right now. I know, I said. I know that. I just didn't trust yourself to know it. The most precise thing anyone had ever said to me. Yeah, I said. That. She looked at me for a long moment. Long enough that I felt the full weight of it. The full exposure of being examined by someone who had known you across enough of your life to compare what they were seeing now against every other version of you they'd stored. Long enough that I understood clearly that whatever came next was going to be entirely hers. Okay, she said. Okay meaning I'm here. Okay meaning I showed up. Okay meaning. She stopped, shook her head, and a small, involuntary smile moved across her face that she didn't bother suppressing. Okay, meaning you are the most complicated person I have ever known, and I've known you since we were 14, so that's saying something. I laughed. I hadn't laughed, actually laughed, the loose, unguarded kind, in longer than I could immediately calculate. It surprised me. It seemed to surprise her too, and she looked at me with something in her eyes that was warm and clear and entirely without reservation. And I thought, there it is. That was the thing I had been afraid to see in the wrong person. That was the thing I hadn't dared to name. I owe you dinner, I said. You owe me about 17 dinners, she said. All that deflecting I had to sit through. Starting tomorrow. Starting tomorrow, she agreed. And then, more quietly, you should have just told me, Marcus. I know, I said. I'm going to spend a long time making that right. Big Mama watched the ceremony on her laptop, which she had learned to operate with the specific dogged competence she brought to all technology, thoroughly, on her own terms, without asking anyone for help she didn't want. Darnell Washington, 2 blocks over, watched it on his television, on a news channel that had picked up the live stream. He sat in the same chair he'd sat in for 40 years, and his daughter later told me he didn't move or speak for the entire ceremony. And when it was over, he sat quietly for a while longer, and then he picked up the phone and called someone, and she wasn't sure who. And she said his voice when he spoke was thick in a way she recognized but rarely heard from him. I don't know all of what happened in those houses that night. Some of it belongs to those people and not to me. But Big Mama told me later that she stayed on that steps of her house past midnight, which she hadn't done since I was a teenager, sneaking in after curfew. And when she came inside, she sat down in her chair and said to nobody, to the room, to whatever version of my grandfather she still carried around with her after all these years. I told you he'd be fine. I told you. I want to leave you with one thing, not a lesson, because I don't think I'm anyone's teacher, and I don't think that's why you're here. Just one true thing. The people who were supposed to see me couldn't, and the person who always had. She was 2 blocks away the whole time, on the same block where we grew up, answering when I texted, showing up when I asked, staying in the room even when I gave her every reason to step back from the doorway and reconsider. I built armor to survive the world outside, and I wore it so long I almost used it on the wrong thing, almost protected myself straight through the one relationship that didn't require it. You can be the most capable person in the room and still be afraid of the right thing. That's not a contradiction. That's just being a human being who has learned to perform certainty well enough to fool the environments that demand it. But you can't fool a kitchen table. You can't fool the steps of the house you grew up on. You can't fool someone who knew you before the medals. Find those people. When you find them, tell them the truth before the ceremony forces you to. And if you've ever been the person standing near the exit, wondering whether to stay, I hope this story gives you something to think about. Drop a comment. Tell me where you're watching from. Tell me if any part of this landed somewhere you recognized. And if you're not subscribed yet, the next one is already coming. You don't want to miss where this goes.